Bill, and I recognize the member for Thornhill.
And it's my pleasure to rise in the House today on behalf of the official opposition to begin debate on Bill 55, which is entitled Strong Action for Ontario Act, or subtitled Budget Measures. And I think probably pretty well anytime I'm putting something in the record that refers to a title of a bill brought by this government, I have to make this remark, and I'm going to make it again. Calling this budget Strong Action for Ontario doesn't necessarily make it so. And I think the bulk of my remarks over the course of the next hour or so will underscore that fact. Just for the benefit of people who might be watching us who are wondering why we're debating the budget at this point, because there was so much publicity the last several weeks to the budget motion and whether or not there'd be an election and so forth in the province of Ontario, there are two different things here. One is the budget motion, which is where the finance minister moves that we adopt his budget, and that has been dealt with by this legislature and passed. And now we're into the technical phase of it, and what we're talking about is Bill 55, which is a piece of legislation which, if passed, enables the budget to take place in the province of Ontario. So I thank you for the opportunity to speak to this. I want to begin by talking about a little bit of my own history in the province of Ontario, because it speaks so much to what my expectations were, and I think the expectations of anybody arriving in this province would be before coming to Ontario. I was a Quebecer, I was a Montrealer, and I moved here with my family, then very young family, in 1983, so 29 years ago. Two young sons. I was a man in my 30s, and it was kind of like the song New York, New York. You know the line, if I can make it there, I can make it anywhere. And I felt that way about moving from Montreal, which had been besieged by political change and so forth, and I was moving to Ontario, which there is no question at that time unarguably was the engine of Confederation. This is where everything was made. This is where financial service business got done. This was where insurance products were invented. This was where homes were being built and condos were being were rising from basically the ground up. And I thought about the lines from that song, and I wound up moving from Quebec to come and work in a big corporation. But the big corporation lasted a period of time, and I thought that it might be appropriate to make the move to small business, because I saw how well my friends, my entrepreneur friends, were doing, and I thought, well, if they can do it, so can I. And I persevered and did so. I wound up in consulting, and probably had the best year I ever had working as a consultant, because by then I had appropriated and assimilated all of this knowledge about how corporate works and then how small business works, and I could advise other people. Indeed, my services were in demand, and I got paid handsomely for doing that. I wound up in media, which many people know. I spent some years on radio as well as running radio stations, and ultimately wound up in this place dealing with the public good and public administration. That's not the story necessarily of my life. It could be the story of anybody's life. That was Ontario. Opportunity. Opportunity for all. Opportunity to use what was available to you based on your experience. And indeed, I was able to do that, and I'm happy to be here today. So I wish I could be standing here to applaud a new way forward for Ontario, because goodness knows Ontario needs that. And I wish today that basically I could say that this is a government that has heard the people, that has heeded the call, that has decided that maybe those times I described about what was happening in my life 30 years ago aren't happening to that extent, or maybe not to any extent anymore. Maybe people have lost some of that hope. Maybe they had believed that. Wish I could be standing here today and say that finally this government is on the road to a balanced budget, which would, at least in part, recreate some of those times. And sadly, Speaker, I cannot stand here and say that any of those things have happened. So instead, I'd like to relate a story about another entrepreneur, and over the course of the weekend, I spent some time with some people. The gentleman is a guy about my age, also an entrepreneur, And he was the very first person to say to me, and he said this weekend, within half an hour of my getting together with him, the first person to say to me, "Why are you people hurting me?" And I said, "How are we hurting you?" And he said, "Well, you put a tax on people who make over $500,000 a year." And I know this guy, and I had no idea until he said that he made over $500,000 a year. And he said, I have to pay a tax on that. And I said, well, I said, cry me a river. I did. I said, how bad can it be? He's actually the first person who complained about it. But it made me think. It made me think on a couple of levels. And I'll get into the nuts and bolts of the budget in a minute, but this very much relates. It made me think of what I had gone through. I never made $500,000 in a year, but it made me think of a time when I did make $300,000–400,000 a year, and I did in private business. It made me think of him making that kind of money now, and it made me think about how you get to that point and what kind of an opportunity base you require in Ontario to get to that point. Because in my own situation, as with my friends, in small business, you risk everything. You roll the dice. He did to get where he is today. I did. I can tell you that his story parallels mine, and mine, when I got into small business, was a situation where I had, when I first started my business, about 24 employees. By the time I sold it, 15 years later, about 125 employees. There was never an employee of my company, never an employee of my friend's company, never, who failed to get a paycheck every 2 weeks. And I can tell you in my own case, as in my friends, to get down that path to those big dollars, I didn't draw a salary for 3 years, the initial 3 years. All I did is write checks. So it was my money, my family's risk being taken that allowed for every single one of those employees to always get paid and never worry about being paid. And, Speaker, I might say, in that Ontario, an Ontario that allowed me that opportunity, not only did I not get paid, I put that money into the company so that other people could get paid, as did my friend, and I changed the light bulbs when they went out, and I cleaned the toilets when they got blocked. All of those things that were necessary to make it. I drove from Thornhill to downtown Toronto, where the company was located, when some machine needed resetting. And then after the 3 years, when I could take some money out, I took $7,500 a month. So whatever the math is, I guess that's about $90,000 a year. Did that for a number of years. And it was only in the last couple of years that I was able to realize some of the rewards that my friend who's making over $500,000 is now realizing. So when you average that out, and I'm not trying to defend the concept of paying more tax if you make more money. I think that's inherent to the Income Tax Act of Canada before you get into any specialty taxes. What I'm saying is no risk, no reward, and if you average out the dollars of people who are making those big bucks, maybe they made $100,000 a year for their risk. And maybe the kind of modification to the legislation that we're considering, which will ultimately come, I'm sure, in amendments, will address the issue. But the fact of the matter is that there's nothing wrong in looking at high incomes and making sure that you do your part and taking them as the pinnacle of something that averaged to much less over that year. And there's also something to be said for not pointing fingers at them, because those are the people who do take risks, and as a result of those risks create the wealth that Ontario has historically had. So those are the stories of my life and of my weekend that inform some of the debate that you're going to hear today in terms of Bill 55, the budget bill. Once the horse trading was completed and the budget motion was passed, it didn't take long for the hammer to fall, did it, Speaker? Like dominoes, rating agencies, objective observers voiced their concerns over any government's direction, over this government's direction in this particular instance. First, we heard that S&P, Standard & Poor's, had announced its negative outlook for Ontario's financial future. That was within 48 hours of the passing of the budget motion that we heard from S&P. Amazingly, within 24 hours of that, Moody's actually got on board and didn't just comment but downgraded Ontario's credit rating. All of this within 72 hours of the passing of the budget motion. Jennifer Wong is Moody's Assistant Vice President, Lead Analyst for Ontario, and she stated, and I'm quoting, "The negative outlook on the province reflects the softening economic outlook, Ontario's growing debt burden, and the extended time frame to achieving a balanced budget." And that source is from Moody's Investor Services. If that isn't a condemning indictment, Speaker, of this government's management or mismanagement of our province, I'm not sure that I